There's a missing gap that I myself had when growing up, not knowing how my ancestors participated in this way of life. If you don't know your family's history, if you don't know where your people came from and where they lived, then there's that kind of lost part of your identity that you never really know. My name is Jessica Douglas, and I'm an enrolled member in the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians.
All my life, I grew up in the city of Beaverton, a suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. I knew I was Native, but it wasn't until college when I started to question what being Native actually meant. I started to ask myself the questions: what does it mean if you don't know who your ancestors are? What does it mean if you don't know where you came from? This is a story about how I found the answer to these questions in an unexpected place. A recipe for cooking an indigenous food.
Audio Jungle.
The Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians are a tribal nation that consists of over 27 different bands. Before settlers arrived, our people lived on the coast and along the inland rivers of southern Oregon. In the 1850s, when the gold rush hit and settlers arrived in Oregon, the U.S. government forcibly removed us to the Siletz and Grand Ronde reservations. About 100 years after removal, in the 1930s, my great-grandfather, Hoxie Simmons, was living on the Siletz Reservation in Siletz, Oregon. I didn't know him because he passed away before I was born, but I was told that he was a storyteller and cultural knowledge bearer in my tribe. He told stories about when our people lived on the Rogue River and before we were removed. He was the last speaker of the Galice language, a language spoken on the Rogue River.
We continue this record of Galice Athabascan words and phrases from Hoxie Simmons.
His dog. Right? What are you checking? What are you checking?
And because he was the last speaker, two linguists, Melville Jacobs and Elizabeth Jacobs, came to document Hoxie in the Galice language. Amongst all the documents that were shared was a recipe to cook camas bulbs, a plant indigenous to the Willamette Valley. When I saw the documents and heard the recordings, it was the first time I had ever heard my great-great-grandfather's voice. It was also the first time I had ever heard anybody in my family speak our native tongue. My grandmother and I were living together at the time when we found the recipe. I didn't know what camas was, I didn't know what it looked like, I'd never seen it before, and I didn't know that you could actually eat the bulbs. I asked my grandma if she and Hoxie ever talked about camas, and she too had no connection or knew what camas was.
Well, I was surprised because I didn't remember anything about camas, so finding that recipe was kind of different and unusual. I had no clue about what it was, and I didn't know that they participated like that.
When I found the recipe, it was incredibly important to me because it was the first time that I could hold this piece of paper and actually have a direct connection to the person who wrote it.
To most people these days, camas would probably not be a familiar plant that anybody would know, but for Native people that were all across the Pacific Northwest, it was a food staple, it was a common plant that people would eat. So after I found the recipe, I started to research all I could about camas. Doing my thesis on traditional ecological knowledge and camas, so I'm out here for
One of the community members that I had the opportunity to speak with was Tecumseh, or Dr. Virginia Beaver. She's a Yakima woman from the Yakima Reservation up in Washington, and she was also my Ichishkian language teacher.
One day after class, we were walking home with Tecumseh, and we got to her doorstep thinking that we were gonna go home, and she turned around and said to us, "Come on in, let me show you my roots." Tecumseh led us into her home, and she brought out a mason jar full of dark charcoaled camas roots that were cooked in a traditional pit oven. That was the first time I had ever had camas.
To my surprise, it tasted kind of sweet and pretty smoky, but it was a lot better than I expected it to be. I heard it was kind of a bland bulb, but it almost tasted kind of like a fig to me.
I felt that if I was going to go down this path of harvesting camas and cooking it, I should be trying to recreate the way in which my ancestors used to harvest it. So through my research, I found that camas was often harvested with large digging sticks, also called a cuppin. It was a large stick, and you'd whittle it down till it was sharp at the end, and then you'd fire burn the tip of it, and at the top was an elk antler that was used as a handle. And so I planned a workshop with master woodcarver Sherrod Yonker from the Coquille tribe to make my own cuppin to be able to dig camas for the first time.
So Iwaniksha Sherrod, he's going to be teaching our cuppin or camas digging stick workshop today. It was really difficult to make the cuppin. It makes it look a lot easier. What the?
And the whole purpose, at least my understanding of making traditional arts, is to open a keyhole so that you can see for at least a short period of time that you're making it, how your ancestors were thinking.
When she told me she was doing this, I thought it was a great idea. And she had to decipher all of these notes that Grandpa Hoxie wrote himself. So I thought it was great. Good idea. Keeps things going, you know.
Looking forward, in the next couple months, I'm going to be harvesting camas and then cooking camas in a traditional pit oven following my great-great-grandfather's recipe.